for us. So it has a lot more to do about, you know, what's the history, what's the, you know, extra bits and pieces can be added to an exhibition when people are looking at it in the future and today. So, Shai, can you check and see if that link is active, if this is a live thing? Because it's, oh, no, I think it's a live thing now. All right. Fingers crossed that it's a live thing, and I don't get. I'll start getting texts from like people that I sent the link to. Okay. Welcome to the second Saturday Artist Talk. Thank you guys for coming. This is an event that originally was developed in conjunction with the Open Art Murmur, although they kind of stopped having group talks on second Saturdays, but we're still holding on to it. And the idea is that we're going to just talk around the exhibition, talk about the ideas that were involved, the history of the people that were involved, and just kind of build a little bit of density to the kind of the periphery of what the work is and how the work came about. And so we're super lucky to have Izidora Leber LETHE here, and Aaron Wilder, our 2018 exhibition fellow, and this is the exhibition that he has curated after being a wonderful assistant to the gallery and learning all things aggregate for the last 7 months, something like that. Yeah. Too long? No. 8 months, maybe? And I'm Conrad Meyers, and I co-founded and am the executive director of Aggregate Space. So we'll open this up to questions at the end, but my first question is really, what leans both of you towards installation art as a medium?
Do you want to start? Should I start?
No, you should start.
So I think of art, I always think of art production in a spatial sense, mm-hmm. and in the sense of actual kind of curating also like the pieces as I'm going. Mm-hmm. I always think of them in relationship to each other. And so there's always inherently kind of an installation, an installative kind of element to it that is spatial, mm-hmm. even though the pieces can be flat or digital or in a dark room or whatever, but like I always see them kind of connected. So I feel like that is where installation is a modality of like producing works that just kind of activates the space. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's a really interesting point. I think it's something that Aaron spotted mm-hmm. in the way you guys were working. Both at SFAI at the same time. You both graduated last year, right?
Yeah.
So what's your I mean, so you're working on a bunch of different things right now. The San Jose State Museum,
San Jose State University, their art gallery,
uh-huh. And you're working on kind of more traditional group shows, kind of painting stuff. But then you're also doing this. You did a show at Empire. I mean, where do you kind of see installation work as it fits into kind of your practice and its importance, what it can do that other things can't do?
Yeah, I think that it creates an experience in a way that a single work wouldn't necessarily have on a viewer. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's more of a movement, I guess, like a emotional movement. Mm-hmm. That I think an individual sculpture or an individual photograph or painting can have, but I think that installation is so much more open-ended. Mm-hmm. And I think I got really interested in that, in installation and the capabilities of it in relation to how an audience can be impacted. I was doing research in my first semester at SFAI on Banksy's Dismaland, and sort of went down a rabbit hole with Fred Wilson's work and a number of other, Mark Diane and others, and just got really interested in that capability of creating something that's more than the sum of its parts, I think.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think, so do you guys think SFAI leans you into that? Or do you think you already kind of felt like that in your art studies prior?
I mean, I think for me it came out of a frustration more than anything. Of like when I create works, they often seem to die the second I put them in a space. You know, so the process to getting there is what the research, the phase of research and experimentation and all of that is really what makes me happy and makes me feel like there's a purpose and connection to, like, kind of also cross-references to other artists, and like I feel like I'm embedded in this larger conversation. Yet when I see work in a space, it's been my experience in the past, I was always just feeling like so saddened about, you know, feeling like it just died.
Yeah.
So the kind of, I think the desire for an installation or like installation, more immersive kind of compositions is to kind of vitalize that and to bring in like elements of sound, time-based media, and like change the wall color, like have it be like a whole entire kind of experience too.
I mean, this is like super heavily on my mind because we're producing this. I mean, Aaron knows quite a bit about it, but we're producing this book of the first 50 exhibitions of Aggregate Space as part of like this year's fundraiser, and I'm like in the midst of writing this forward, which may be why I started with that question. I wasn't like actively thinking about it, but I mean, it's like what is the point of having an installation space over having a space that's kind of dedicated to this thing? And I mean, there's like the simple answers of like, you know, commercial versus non-commercial, or socially active spaces and like culturally active spaces versus ones that are kind of meant to kind of be more design heavy or be more. It's like trying not to talk down to it or talk around to it, but it is a different scenario when you're participating in art for the purpose of yourself and your future and your well-being, and the artist's self and future and well-being, and the content's future self and well-being. So, like that's like just such a different conversation than I like or I want to buy or I want to have than this other thing. So I mean, I think all of those kind of play a part in what we, you know, like what I feel about installation work. But I mean, I think your points about stuff dying on the wall. I mean, we have so many conversations about that. Like this space in particular is somewhat famous internally with work that we regret hanging or allowing artists to hang on the walls in here because
swallowed up,
because it just disappears. You know, it's like you know, like a book on the wall in this room kind of just would go away if it wasn't for, you know, this blue love, like the, you know, the forced perspective kind of shifting your point of view, you know, the projection in the other space. Like there's like a lot of things that are considered, but when it's just a white wall with like even a big work, like a 4 foot by 4 foot painting looks like nothing in here. So I mean, I think that's part of it. And you guys were extremely astute with how that happened. I mean, how do you, like when you guys feel about like your collaboration on this show, like when did it start? Like when did it really like, kind of get going?
Do you want me to answer it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I curated a group show, as you mentioned, at Embark earlier this year, and Izidora and I have known each other since our second semester, I think, when we were in John Hershen's critique seminar. And I was actually really interested in a work you did, Outside, a video work, when I was curating the show at Embark. It was called This Message Has No Content, and it was about sort of the disconnect between people that happens almost because of digital interactions, or like a shift to everything being through more of a digital perspective than an actual interpersonal interaction. So it was a number of artists that were in that show, and Izidora was one of the participating artists, and she created a brand new video diptych that was in the show that I thought was just really amazing. And we started talking a little bit after you were in a residency in Banff, which this piece was a result of. So It was right after you got back, and we were talking in your studio about actually another show that didn't happen. It may still happen, but at a different venue. And we just started talking about different sort of concepts about this work, and then also other ideas in relation to this book as well that you've been working on for a while. Yeah, so that's sort of where things left off. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, it was maybe about 3 months ago or something, I would say. Like, it was kind of, okay, this is like either, either we go for it immediately or we can't keep talking, like either we go for this or not. And so it's been kind of like full force ever since. Because we can do this. I'm going to be gone for 6 weeks, okay?
Very productive 6 weeks, I have to say.
Yeah, it's true. So I guess the process was looking at the time constraints, also kind of as in like in my end of production and kind of conceptualization, all of that. It was like kind of producing all of the material things, the matter first, and then besides this work, all of it is new, and then doing the digital work while I was gone.
I mean, so I think to your credit, it doesn't feel like it was rushed at all. But also, like, Aggregate has two types of shows. We have ones that happen in a 2-month period, and then ones that take 3 years. Like, that's the only type. We don't have, like, there's not like a lot of these, like, 6 months, like, hey, you ready for your show next year? Yeah. That doesn't happen. It's like, like people are like building and building and building toward the show, or we do these ones where like everything seems right and it happens. So I'm kind of happy that, like, it's one of the reasons the exhibition fellow is like built for that. It's like, it's made to be like, get a handle on what we're doing and what do you think works here, and how fast can you move into that world. So there's like, it's always kind of heavy at the end. But I mean, I think this is of the 4 exhibition fellows, this is the first time it was a solo show. So that's super impressive, because I mean, a lot of people aren't ready for that or can't kind of perceive of that. Like Shageshir last year was 2 artists, and it was like a very strong idea of like pairing 2 artists and making them collaborate, and really took advantage of the space. But this is like, you've really built an exhibition, for this, and I love it. I love the blue line. I love the video, that sort of thing. So what? I guess I could turn back. Can you tell me more about the video piece, the diptych that you made?
Soft power is what it's called, right? Softness. Sorry.
Okay. So the diptych, so in the time of social media and Google terror and email checking and constant access, I was doing a lot of video art kind of a few years back, and then I started really wanting to materialize again, and I think it's kind of a movement that's happening in general, right? Like emotion, where it's like either we hyper digitalize and like really try to deconstruct that, or of course much in between, but like, or we try to like actually like go back into mud and like go back into like those ancient forms or whatever in my case. And okay, so I was asked to participate in this show, and I was like, okay.
We had some fun conversations.
No, of course. I'm not saying it was hard. I'm just saying, like, how am I going to approach this? As again, I'm frustrated about it.
Right.
Which apparently seems to be a good place for work. So I did this piece that kind of tries to plug into the notion of the sexiness of the critique surrounding the digitality and kind of the overtaking of it in our visual culture. And so I created this piece that kind of narrates itself as it's unfolding. So there's like this soft skin, and then you see skin, you know, pearls of water, and then you see like the pearls of water, which is like the kind of the image of sex in it, you know, like in ways like just playing with these like sexy tropes and trying to kind of dig into the elements of like I guess critique and like what is, so I called it softness because I kind of wanted to create a piece that simulates critique yet fails at it and delivers kind of a soft, safe critique.
Okay.
There's also another element to it that relates to this piece is that above the two TVs was a row of what looked like emergency hammers that are used to break glass, but they're made out of ceramics. And when we were installing it, Tanya Hutziger, who runs Embark Gallery, lent us the TVs. Like, they weren't even Embark's property; they were Tanya's. And I was talking to her when we were installing. I was saying, I don't, because there were other interactive pieces in the show, and this had no wall text.
Right. And
I said, you know, I don't know if we should be concerned. Do you think someone would take a hammer and hit the TV? Because they're placed in close proximity to each other. And she's like, we'll see.
Did anybody?
No.
You could have.
Yeah.
Could have.
That's a pretty good one. Yeah, there were definitely, there were some people nervous night of the opening about your flags falling.
Yes.
And then one eventually decided to leap.
Yep. That's the answer to the question if they're fixed or not.
Yeah, if anybody has that question later.
It's gravity.
Don't waste your time. To talk around the show a little bit, like Blue-Barbar-Braid is. Can you speak about your, like how it was birthed, like how this, like what were the things that were influenced? Because it is extremely heady in references, like multiple tracts of art and historical criticism, as well as like an extreme point of view of your own, and it's dense. Even for almost anything we've ever shown, it's one of kind of the more complicated things. And can you just talk about like how you've been working towards that, or if it was something that came together rather quickly, of just overlapping ideas that you felt like you needed to just address, or was it something that like you've always wanted to address these things? Is that too much of a...
It's a multi-layered answer, probably. I think... So I wanted to kind of... I've been trying to find, of course, my own kind of methodologies to deal with the questions I have surrounding... well, kind of in the most basic form, what cultural production today means in relationship to its potential to resist. And also the notion of memory and different temporalities, what they can lend us for our understanding of the future. So it really, the questions have been sitting deep and have been developing for a long time. And the book, actually, Lethe, that I wrote, is probably the basis kind of for the rest that happens. And I've seen it as some form of like kind of between cultural criticism, essay, and kind of a manifesto that shapes my work. Or kind of contextualizes my work too, and hopefully expands it. It's been kind of a baseline for it. So the book really asks the question again of forgetting, as Lethe is a mythical figure in ancient Greece, about oblivion and forgetfulness, and the relationship between that and different art historical moments too, that I feel like are very dominant still in the way that we think of art. For example, kind of a modernist architectural understanding of space and of the human, than minimalism and like those kind of like those notions that try to break off, kind of create a new artist that is an artist that is not anymore the kind of autonomous genius subject, but one that lets their work be produced, mass-produced, and so on. And so, like, just kind of like attacking and attaching into those kind of notions that I think form our understanding of visuality today of contemporary art, and like subverting them and trying to queer them and trying to place the kind of the subject back in. Okay, so that's a broad answer to your question.
It was a super broad question.
Okay.
Legit. But I think more like, I mean, so if I get to try to redirect that a little bit, do you feel like this is part of an ongoing conversation, that this is the first step of, or is this the fifth step? Or are you at the end of this query, like, since the book is kind of where the book is? You know, what's the, where do you feel like this fits in that quest of like dealing with like a lot of these ideas in forms of cultural production?
Yes, I think this is maybe step 2. So I think the first step that I feel like I could fully kind of dive into and approach, and like was actually at Banff at the residency. It was a very intense month, just like really, and one of my Banff co-artists is here, which is really nice. It was a month to fully kind of like create work that are divorced from the school setting, the institution, and so forth. And like it was a very autonomous period of really thinking through my questions again. And so that's where the braid kind of developed, because I was doing ceramics, and out of the ceramics I started doing welding, and then through being in these very material processes, I could think through the book again and kind of go in and revise it, and thinking about the braid as kind of the idea of a methodology of how to bring different strings together that remain kind of autonomous or singular, yet form a stronger unit. So like I think this is what I'm trying to do, and therefore I'm saying step 2, and I feel comfortable in this mode of thinking, and it's going to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that you're doing to tie works together that feel like they're like if I were to see them, if they weren't in this room, like if it was in 5 rooms, I wouldn't assume that they were made by the same person. And I think that you're tying them together in such subtle ways, like simple shapes, like you have this obsession with kind of like this focal point, which you're dealing with the fabric piece and the room and the flags, and then you're kind of obsessing about this bluish kind of not ocean, not sky blue, but like this navy kind of blueprint blue that you're then referencing in some blueprints and in your costumes, So there's and then there's kind of like the wave shapes that are like being referenced in clothing, and then in the ceramic pieces, and so it's like there's things that are tying it together, but they're just far enough away to keep, personally, to keep me kind of consistently intrigued as to what the real connection is. And I like it's you're under-explaining it, which I love. I look forward to seeing the version of this in a place that over-explains it, and seeing what that does differently. Like somebody that forces you maybe to have a paragraph of wall text next to each piece, which
I would do the same way.
Yeah. Like, what do? You say everything, or do you write poetry? Like I wonder what you would do.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
say everything in poetry.
Were wall labels ever on the table in conversation?
We didn't really talk about it. I think we had, from the very beginning, we had talked about having the map with just
titles.
The titles.
Enough information.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, someone I think at the opening was asking me about a similar question about sort of what ties the work together, I was like, well, you need to spend more time with each individual piece if it's not coming across to you. But I think, I think wall labels would sort of destroy some of the intentions behind the work, because each piece is poetic and metaphorical in how they relate to each other. And I think having too much text sort of destroys that poeticism.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't always do the maps. We did labels for a while, maybe 2 years, on and off. And I don't remember the first time we did maps, but to me it was like, oh, this is how we should do it. Because it allows people, like there are the people that want that information right away, and they can take it and ruin their experience if they want to do that. Oh, and then there are the people that don't care at all, and they'll see the whole exhibition and then leave without ever looking at it. And then there's the people that'll see the whole exhibition and realize they want more, and then go and get them, and then see it again with new information. And that's my dream of this sort of people. Like it's the same thing as like what we always talk about, the screening room, which we'll turn back on after the talk. And we'll clean this all up, and it'll be the exhibition again in about 10 minutes after this finishes. But the screening room we treat as something that it's supposed to change the exhibition. Like we think about that very heavily, that like the exhibition exists in this room with you in the work, in a conversation, and then you go into the theater and you experience that, and then you come back out and this is different. And that's something that we really, I feel like Aaron got and communicated to you. I never communicated that, but that is exactly what your piece does. It changes it. I think half the people, like the people that may just have popped in here and never saw the screening room, have no idea of the level of like overt activism that's happening in this work and like in your mind. And then you see that piece and you're like, oh, that's what this is about. I just feel like it changes. It turns it from being a very kind of like wonderfully compelling and confusing aesthetic set of works to a wonderfully confusing set of subversive aesthetic works. So I don't know. I mean, I think that you guys did a really good job on that. I guess I'm going to change course really well because I want to kind of hear more about Izidora, but I'll start with Aaron. This is not your first curation.
This is not my first what?
Career.
No.
Right? You came from marketing, right? Or
I came from, I don't really know how to describe my previous career in a concise way.
I know.
Other than business.
Okay.
Let's call it that.
What made you ditch?
Well, I went to business school and then was in a succession of different positions that took me from like grant writing at a nonprofit to operations at a federal government agency to a consulting firm. And I think it was, if I had never gone to work at the consulting firm, I probably never would have made the switch. So the parallel to all of this, I was creating artwork and actually ran my own art space in Phoenix for only 9 months. So it was kind of a two parallel tracks that I saw as very separate. And when I found myself in my position working for a large consulting firm, traveling 4 or 5 days a week, working 80 hours a week, I just was like, what am I doing? If I'm going to be working this much, I might as well be doing something to add to sort of societal conversations and not to the bottom line of my clients.
Right.
So part of it was that I was burnout. Part of it was that I had I felt like an ethical dilemma of I'm spending all of this time basically making these rich people richer. And that, like, what am I doing? So anyway, I ended up, I saw that I needed to get out of there. But it took me about 2 years to figure out what the next step was. And yeah, I just decided that I needed to go 100% into the art world. So,
and this was how long ago?
So 2013 is when I had the realization. 2015 is when I actually up and left.
Nice.
And moved here.
Nice. And you did SFAI right away or post-bac?
Yeah, right away. I went right into the MFA program. Yeah.
Was it like absolutely shocking, or did you feel like, oh, this is home?
Is it weird if I say neither? I didn't feel quite at home.
Nobody does it.
But I felt energized. At SFAI was exactly the kind of environment that I was looking at, something that would challenge me, and something in media and different types of artistic experimentation. And also, I specifically went there because of the conceptual focus.
Mm.
Yeah.
Agreed. I agree. Same.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we met at
SFAI.
At SFAI, at Masters. They bring in outsiders to do studio visits, and we met briefly.
Yeah.
For that, we talked about your thesis show and how miserable you were with what was going on at the moment, I think, and you had some frustrations. And
there's never frustrations.
Yeah, that's how it works. And so, what was your path to SFAI? You can take a short route or a long route. I like a long route.
Okay, I'll be quickly long. So I started studying philosophy when I was 20, and I thought that because I love it, I thought that that's what I wanted to do. I studied philosophy and gender studies for 1.5 years, and realized that I would regret my life if I didn't try being an artist, because I always wanted that beforehand. I just had a big cut from art for a few years. I didn't do anything. Like, I just couldn't. I was really just not sure how to go about it, because I thought of it as drawing and painting or whatever, like the classics. And so, and so I did my BFA kind of late or whatever, at 23. And I did it in Zurich, in Zurich, Switzerland, and then I had an exchange semester in Portland, which turned into a year, and I kind of learned about the different school systems, and I thought that the one in the States actually was much more rigorous, because I could say more about that, but I don't. And so, just as in like learning technicalities, like learning how to print and film and edit and all of those things that I felt like I really needed to learn, also to be able to transmit it later on with teaching, but also to be able to just play more, experiment more.
Was it the school in Portland? Was it a
PNCA.
state school or was it an art school?
It was an art school,
PNCA.
Okay. Yeah. And so I returned, did my BFA back, finished it in Zurich, and then took another maybe 2-year break in between, and then decided that I wanted to do my MFA, or that was the right time. And so I received the MFA fellowship, and then it was pretty easy to decide to go to SFAI, but also it was the legacy of a few other artists that I've really loved that weren't there anymore, weren't teaching there anymore, but I love them, so it pulled me in. And I've been having a really, it's been actually really wonderful for me living in the Bay Area, as wild as it is, and as conflictuous as it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think not to get too depressing, but the people that make it here, or the people that stay here for 5+ years, are the ones that it's just, like it's impossible to stay here. You don't just coast in the Bay Area. Like, whether you have money or not, like, this place just beats you So the people that are here like 10 plus years, you're just like, wow. The people that are like here, like people that like moved here in their teens and are still here like 30 years later, it's like, whoa. I don't know, I'm always impressed.
I get that question a lot, like, when are you moving to New York?
Right. Yeah. Or LA, I get yeah.
You know, or LA. And for the moment, the answer is no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, because for those of us that came here for very particular reasons, those continue to not go away despite the cost of living and, you know, the like massive, quick moving gentrification by neighborhood.
Absolutely.
You know, like the
all
reasons.
those stupid scooters.
Well, they're banned in San Francisco, right? As of like yesterday or something like that.
What?
Somebody just told me that yesterday.
That's what the gentrification's
BS.
moving on. That's what I
Yeah, the gentrification's kicking in on a green scooter.
I want to try a ride on one of them.
I saw 2 kids coming down West Grand. It was 3 kids coming down West Grand riding 2 each, like skis, and laughing hysterically. And it was like the greatest thing. It was on the way to work the other day. So we're fighting to stay. Okay, so we have that in common. I'm trying to figure out where to aim this. I feel like, I think project-based, like this piece is such a future, and because it's expandable, it's shrinkable, you could grow it, you could change the videos, you could make it be more performance heavy or more video heavy. I mean, there's so much to it that you could really continue to finesse it per space, but that will run out in the Bay Area. There's not 100 art spaces here in the Bay Area. There's only 28 or whatever, you know. I mean, it's not like in an art haven, so you know you'll exhaust your options pretty quickly. I mean, do you imagine this traveling? Do you imagine this kind of being something that you could kind of put into a larger conversation? And if that's so, like, what do you imagine that conversation that this would work best in? You know? I mean, does it feel really right in the Trump era to be showing this in the Bay Area, or would you rather try to get this like into Kansas City or
DC?
Yeah, or you know, North Carolina.
Yeah, if you got ideas, hit me up.
Yeah, no, but like, do you see it kind of as like a more of an urban statement in kind of this? Because it is. I mean, it is very much for the educated, but it exists without that necessity.
I see, exactly. I mean, it's really my aim to kind of have multi-layered entrance points into my work. So as much as I really don't want to compromise on kind of the intellectual labor of critique and of thorough critique, I also really want there to be the space of immediacy, like a fingerprint and a squiggly drawing, and that really matters to me, and everything in between the two, that tension, and I think that's how I work with all these different medias and how they relate. So to answer the question of traveling, I think this exhibition doesn't have to exist here at all. I've been trying to create, as much as it is space specific, like I also think of it more textually or discursively, and therefore it's, as I'm thinking about like kind of the creation of a collective, of a clandestine collective of ancestors to come, right? These are the people that have really been making this show. That has been a space of a temporality that really kind of opens it up, you know, for me, and isn't bound to necessarily an urban setting or an American setting for that matter too, right? So I'm sure everything would change or will change depending on the context, as it always does. But also, I think the inherent questions can kind of keep being posed anywhere, or that's what I would love to achieve. Yeah,
I mean, it's you know, you made me think of this. Trying to formulate this thought without sounding weird, because it's a weird thought.
Just be weird.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're making very selfish work, but it is speaking to like a global understanding and a selflessness in its critique, and it's like a tightrope that you're walking of speaking. I mean, again, speaking to an educated history, to passions, to things that exist beyond the United States or beyond Europe, things that are kind of like people that have studied art kind of maybe remember. Like maybe we haven't studied these things maybe in a while, but we remember studying them and remember how they affected us then. Even though we're not holding on to that still, it's still important that like those moments. I mean, I studied architecture for years, and so like there's aspects to what you're addressing that are like so like memorizing slides, and like there's just parts of it to it, but then you're insisting on these kind of very personal moments in them. Again, these gestures, these choosing ceramic of all things to address where historical architecture sits, which is both kind of ironic and perfectly fitting for what you're playing with. So I think that like that's really tough to do, and I think if you can hold on to that, without swinging too much into your ego at some point or too much into the intellectual, like holding on to this great balance that you have, because it feels. I mean, again, like the thing that I always lean back to, like what makes a show good, is I'm still asking myself questions. It's like a movie. It's like I'm still asking myself questions when I see an image of it later, or when somebody mentions that they went to that show, like being able to say, like, yeah, what was that piece about? Like those lingering things are what I kind of live for, and so it's one of the reasons the space exists the way that it does, and the way we're trying to promote it, and trying to stay in this nonprofit realm where we can give people money to do shows instead of begging them. I mean, I think like all of those things kind of just twist together. I think it's like this was a really good collaboration. I felt like the install was one of the most fun installs I've had in a really long time, because it was so much was decided and so much wasn't. Like it was so much that like we were negotiating, based on like our different expertise in this place. So I really appreciate that. I think. How would we feel if we open up for questions? I mean, is there anything you wanted to address, either of you, that didn't come up kind of organically through the chat? Maybe more will come up through some questions.
Yeah, maybe that.
I wanted to mention one thing that I think, and this is from your book, if I'm not mistaken, but there's a quote that I thought was just particularly beautiful, was when you're talking about these unknown future past ancestors, these queer ancestors, and the idea of monumentality, and saying, and I hope I don't misquote you. If you do, school me on it. But that if you said something to the effect of, if we need monuments at all, it should only be those that are meant to crumble and fall, which I think in particular to this, like sort of predicted almost that happening. And I think that to me is a statement of the show, like in a very concise form. I don't know. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I love that you're saying that. I love that you're bringing that up. It's beautiful. And you've quoted it well. No, I think that's really kind of at the core of the questions. Yeah, it's like, I mean, for one, the question of kinship, and like all of these works have been created with so much help, so many friends, from providing space for me to produce them, to going through the text, through welding, through, I mean, it was such an effort of kinship and of friendship, and that's the backbone of this whole entire of my practice. And then the other question about the form of how do we commemorate but also memorialize histories that shape us and keep shaping us, such as the idea of kind of, you know, the Greco-Roman, as in beauty ideals, notions of body normativities, politics, thought, the division between thought and the body. I mean, there are so many ways that trace back to those moments, but then also those other moments that I'm talking about, like the architectural, the kind of Bauhaus, and how they kind of changed our understanding of what it is to do art, and that art and craft need to be kind of combined and not separated, and to kind of like formulate or like make production more visible and its circulation to across, etc. Right, to like this moment, and you know, there's a lot of references in the whole show, like for example, Derek German's video called Blue that he did in 1993, who is a queer filmmaker that did this video that was just one blue tone, and he was talking about it was the moment of him becoming blind as he was taking HIV medication and kind of suffering the consequences from that. And so it's about kind of bringing together these moments and thinking about the monuments that can that are fluid, or that can kind of mutate or develop across time. And so this was a terrible accident, but it was a perfect accident. And first we wanted to clean it up, and then it was like, no, of course we're gonna leave it down here. And not only because it shows its own brokenness, but I also think it kind of re-materializes the pieces that are hanging there. So like the kind of doubt, is it felt or leather or whatever, like is immediately erased. And like, no, you know, this is what it is. It's breakable. It's, yeah. And it should be. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much for that. Before we open up to questions, I'm going to announce this. So the next one of these will be on the 12th or the 13th. Either way, I got the date wrong on the card. And I switched first Friday and second Saturday dates. And I haven't screwed up a card at like 40 exhibitions. So I'm going to leave it. And Mika's here. So our next exhibition is Mika Sperling's Before You, Above the Circle, which is an extension of Mika's MFA exhibition, also from SFAI. So the Mika's our MFA Invitational, as we call it, which is the fifth year that we've done this. Man, that's crazy. Fourth year? Fifth year. So we try to go to as many MFA shows as we can and get a good report on people and reach out and interview half dozen and see kind of who's kind of ready to do something. And Mika was 100% in on producing an exhibition, and we could not be more excited to put it together. So it's going to be really beautiful. Mostly video show, and it opens on the 5th of October, and then we'll have another second Saturday on the 13th. 13th, 11 a.m. So 13th of October is the next time we're doing one of these. So tell your friends. We'll have mimosa that's properly balanced. Hopefully nobody's too cross-eyed. So does anybody have any questions for anybody here about the space, about Aaron?
What's the bathroom?
The hallway to the stairs. Behind easy.
Historically over there.
Yeah.
Historically.
Yeah.
I wonder if I could ask a selfish, help me read question.
Yeah, please.
I don't have a background in art history. I'm only sort of starting to discover your work, but I'm so interested in what you were saying about, breaking monuments, about being interested in time, memorializing and commemorating, and then, as you're saying all this, I'm watching this, I guess, what do you call it, a succession of images, let's say, where you have these ruins, and so you have the ruination of monuments, and then this reenactment, and I'm kind of really interested in these bodies that are breathing and that are in a totally different time from the time of the monuments, even though they're all in time because the bodies are breathing, so you know they're alive and mortal. So I thought that was, I wonder if you could kind of talk about how the human body kind of comes into these different art installations that have to do with inorganic material in relation to your concerns with time and memory. Is that too long?
Yeah. No, I love that question. It's been an element, I think, going back to the moment where I was frustrated about art feeling just dead, when my work's feeling dead when I put them in a space, in a white space. And as I was starting to think more through kind of sculpture and the history of sculpture and how it's evolved and how the pedestal has become a part of the sculpture throughout kind of the last 60 years or 100 or and various artists kind of starting to break open what is the sculpture, and then of course the notion of performance to break that. I just really aim at breaking the divide between what is dead and what is alive, I think, in total. And here, that is something that I'm gonna keep working on for sure, because it makes me, so the first iteration of this kind of performative forms, or I call them simple forms and simple formations, was at the Young Museum. And there was an exhibition in 2017. There was an exhibition about kind of the summer of love, and I felt like you know, it was kind of a very aesthetic kind of thread through the fashion and the music and the hallucinogenic moment of the summer of love. And I was invited to perform sculptures that I made, which were these tie-dyed masks that were titled Commonality and were laid on the floor in a circle. So I thought that was, I mean, that invitation was amazing. It was ideal. And I thought, of course, I would love to kind of mark that evacuation of the political in that exhibition. 68 was not just the summer of love, or love looked many different things in 68. And so I asked 11 performers that were, you know, that were embodying the masks, and formed these kind of rows in front of the museum. Inside of the museum, they kind of reenacted specific sculptures that were produced in 68. So it was a kind of reference to some like very minimalist, clean-cut edge sculptures, but they formed them with their bodies and would hold the poses just as here. And they switched between in and outside of the space. Inside of the space, they weren't allowed to wear the masks for security measures. So they, yeah, we kind of developed a way of how to deal with that. And outside of the show, people were really confused, like what that was, like if it was actually the show being protested, or it was, so that element of like kind of, oh my God, like having an experience of like being able to actually immediately transmit works, and to transmit the content and the thoughts through bodies that were all incredible performers, that I have such a luck also to kind of have those kind of connections and friendships here with like incredible performers in the Bay Area. There's so many like, you know, drag queens and drag kings and all sorts of art performers that are there and willing to participate. And so that's been really fantastic. And so yeah, a long-winded answer on only one aspect of your question, but I think yesterday someone mentioned that coming into this space kind of forces them to slow down and to just look at this for a second. One finds a still, and if you look a little longer, one finds a body. or a breathing body, and that's really what I wanted to kind of let happen as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Talk a bit more about this connection between oblivion and awareness.
Yes. So, well, we are all currently in the river of oblivion, as we are in this show. So, it's been... So as I'm trying to think about what cultural production is today, I'm also trying to think about what the kind of social fabric is. And as I think through that as a double immigrant, that is one of the aspects of my subjectivity, I have always been very compelled to think about forgetting and remembering and constituting one's narrative, if it is cut or fragmented especially. And so to me, to find that figure, Lethe, was, which is, so it's one of the 5 rivers that lead to the underworld. So it's one of the 5 rivers before the underworld, and one in the Greek mythology. And one needs to ingest the river in order to forget your whole mortal life. And that kind of what allows you to move to the next step. So to fully die. So you're only kind of half dead right in that moment. And you're still flesh. You're still a body that needs to drink. So I was really intrigued by that moment that was this in-between, between life and death, but also between flesh and kind of spirit. And I started wondering if there's a way to kind of subvert, if there's a moment in that history in which one just doesn't drink the water, and what would happen to kind of what would it mean to be able to just live in the in-between? So kind of, which is also a queer question, and it's also, I mean, I think that's where I'm trying to really place my work and make it live. So in kind of a zone of like commemoration of forgetting or something, like that zone right in between. I don't know if that is answering your question.
Yeah.
Anybody else? You have one more?
I got plenty of questions. Well, I come back to, you know, what you were talking about in terms of your video. You have this formulation. It's called softness, and it wasn't soft power. It was about softening critique, but also kind of being. It seems like I don't know. I was completely fascinated by it. It's uncompromising and also very joyful. So I'm just in general, like, could you tell us what you mean by like soft critique, which I think you mentioned earlier, right? In the discussion.
Yes.
So just, sorry, quick clarification. This piece is not softness. Softness was for a completely different exhibition.
Okay. All right.
Just to clarify.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I was asking about another exhibition just because he mentioned it, and I thought I didn't know about that piece, and so I was kind of.
But is this question of soft critique something that speaks to you, or was that just specific to that installation or video? In which case, I retract my question. But I'm intrigued because it's there's a lot that's happening in relation to critique in that video, but it's also very playful. It's very loving.
Yeah.
It's very life-affirming. It's kind of, those are not things that one associates with a certain idea of critique.
Yes.
And it seems like that's what's so kind of interesting about your work, is its joyous, playful, yet utterly profound kind of critique, but that's also very generative.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks so much. I think softness is so much part of I would have not put it that way, I think, prior, and in that show is very much related to kind of a softness of critique versus kind of a militant critique, I guess, or like toward like a, you know, like a completely rooted critique or a radical critique. But actually, what you're saying is, I really love that. I think well, in the video here, we can't hear it, but like, and you've mentioned it, how it's like kind of the center of the space, and it was so clear to me that needed to kind of be the heartbeat of the show, and so it's what it literally is. One can hear the beat, but also it is the piece that kind of softens, but also at first is like extremely like seizure alarm kind of seizure alarm zone, and I think we navigate those tensions all the time, and I navigate them specifically also in the steel and the porcelain and the materiality of the work in itself, and the kind of history and kind of the personal histories, and that relationship is everywhere, I think, between hard and soft in a way, or softening within the circumstances given, or parameters. Yeah.
I'd like to add something too, if I may. And this is both from my perspective in working with you on this exhibition and knowing your previous work, but also, I guess, my own curatorial interests, artistic interests, my own individual perspective, is that things like a statement of kindness or tenderness or life affirmation from the point of view of a queer subjectivity is a critique in and of itself, reaffirming the ability to have that kindness and tenderness and sort of self-possession, I think is a critique, but also is so much more than that, particularly today. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, yeah.
Just maybe it's a question or maybe a comment that circles back to the your opening about installation. So I came to the opening and came into this room and it was social. Then my attention went to various parts of the installation, but I missed the little blue tongue on the wall. Going in, but I did see the map and went back there and said, oh, this is the first moment. It completely changed everything in this room as the kind of opening gesture. And I think that that's, I don't know, something that only installation can do.
Right.
That I thought was really working, because then the flags were also tongues, the triangle shapes, and then it's just I think a great example for me of what you all have put together in this space and the way it works.
Yeah, there was another option for the front entry that was a little less nasty, but it made sense, I think, in that, again, it's like we Aaron and I and Izidora thought significantly about what it means to kind of give people a little bit of a taste, no pun intended, of like what the show is. And so we had already settled on this drawing on the card, and then the text of the card, which is very descriptive of like underlying ideas that may or may not be permeating through all of the exhibition or parts of it, you know. And then, you know, to give this other piece of work that kind of maybe touches on the other side of things. You know, it is ceramic, it is sculptural, it is very non-traditional, it's displayed in a very non-traditional way. And so it's like to compare that with the image in the card, which is an extremely traditional, despite it being like a zoomed in detail of the drawing. You know, it creates a palette and a grouping of several things that kind of you can use to enter the room. So I'm sorry that you missed it, but it's super great that you that was drawn to attention. Do you want to talk about that piece at all? Or do you want to just leave it as...
Well, it's titled Desire, and it's titled Desire 35,000 BP, and BP is a scientific measurement of time that made me really happy to encounter, as it doesn't circle around a predominant Western religion to mark time, but also because it means before present, and the time of present is when in the 50s, when atomic matter started to change the geological layers of the Earth. And so BP, I just want to spread the word about BP. no, but also I was thinking with this piece, I was also thinking, just to give a little bit of a background kind of reference, I was thinking about the oldest cave paintings that were found to date, and how they date between 30 and 35,000 years back, and that desire, that mesmerizing beauty of those gestures, and that desire of communication, how the one thing that's lasted to communicate, to permeate these thousands of years are these gestures, and what forms of speaking and of desire we can employ to penetrate all these layers, or to stretch across all these layers, and I thought that was beautiful. Yeah.
To rest across the layers.
Yeah.
In resistance.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Maren. Thank you, Izidora.
Thank you.
Thank you, Conrad.
Yeah, and thank everybody. Please hang out. We'll make a quick change of the space and clean some stuff up. Help yourself. There are way too many muffins, and we can do water and coffee on request. No problem. So, thanks again for coming.
Thanks.
Yeah, just like